Today's episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast is brought to you by TCG Player, your source for all your trading card game needs. Please consider using our link in the description for your next purchase, as it helps support the continued refinement of our show. This episode is also made possible through the gracious support of our Patreon members. If you wish to join this esteemed group, simply visit patreon.com/The Mind Sculptors and become part of the SCULPTY family today. And of course, if you prefer a simpler gesture, we invite you to subscribe, leave a like and comment on YouTube, or leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts as a most fitting offering to the ever-watchful algorithm Jesus.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast. I'm Sculpty boy Callahan.
I am Ian, who's realized that his messy closet door is wide open for everyone to see.
Okay, but there's this behind me, so I think you're fine.
I don't know.
It's fine. People know what they're getting into.
That's fair.
They pull up a Mind Sculptors podcast.
Yeah, when they scoop a little bit of the Mind Sculptors under their plate at Thanksgiving, then they know exactly what sort of tomfoolery they're getting into. The Thanksgiving one really got you? Okay, cool.
That did it for me. That really did it for me.
Oh yeah.
Gosh, that's funny. So I got to share a wild thing that happened to me yesterday while I was in the drive-thru at McDonald's.
Okay.
So I'm like ordering at the drive-thru, like the radio thing.
The drive-thru is what somebody call it.
The drive-thru. And so I get done with my order and I go to pull around and some dude just pulls in front of me that was not in the drive-thru line at all. Goes up to the window and I'm just I'm not very confrontational in person. Yeah. So I was just kind of like, okay, I guess. And I wasn't about to get my car hit because of it.
Sure.
And the dude got my food. They had to remake my food.
Did he pay?
That I don't know. Because I paid for mine.
Yeah,
but they gave
for his though.
They gave him my order.
Oh my god!
And I was just like, "What the fuck just happened to me?" I've never seen that happen before.
Did they at least believe you?
No, they were the person that was at the first window was just when I was just they went back and talked to him and they were like, oh yeah, some jagoff pulled through and they were like, sorry about that, pull through to spot one, we'll bring you out new food.
That is insane.
I thought I was gonna have a stroke. I was literally busting at the seams angry. I was so pissed off. I was like, what the fuck is happening?
Yeah.
And it's not there was a long line behind them either. There was a car behind me and one person, you know how they have the two lanes at McDonald's?
Yeah.
There was a person in the lane to the right of me and a person behind me. And that was it in the drive-thru. And this guy saw that and said, fuck it. I'm keeping the line.
They said, hold my beer.
Maybe. I don't fucking know, man. I swear to God, some of the wildest shit I've ever seen just happens exclusively to me, it feels like.
Yeah.
But, is what it is. I do want to also, everybody in our comment section, Ian and I are not going to get matching lime scooter tattoos. Lime scooters are the enemy. I need to remind. I'll get a Buick tattoo. I'll put that brand. I will gladly represent that brand.
Okay. It's a vibe.
But no, I saw one person on Twitter said that, and then I saw like another.
Well,
I
I
want to say
think
there was a comment
we can blame our lovely friends at the Howling Salt Mine, Sam, who at least incepted the idea into our lovely audience.
Yeah, incepted the tattoo idea.
Yes.
I'm not against the tattoo. That's not the fundamental. But you understand that lime scooters are the enemy, right?
Yeah. Right. That's like me. You know what? Actually, every joke I was about to make there is super not appropriate. So.
Amazing.
Anyways.
So I don't know if you've noticed, but Thrasios Tymna is kind of like doing good again. It's some might say it's back on the menu, big time. And so we thought, since Thrasios Tymna has not been the dominant deck in cEDH for a few years,
right?
There are a reasonable number of people who have started playing cEDH that might not be familiar with the many flavors of Thrasios and Tymna.
Cal, I'm feeling a little fancy today. I feel like we should put on our chef's smock and get our.
You know what? I'm gonna let you do that one again. I'm gonna let you retake that one. That's a free pass on me.
No.
You know what word it is. Go ahead. I know you know this word. I know you know what it is.
Yeah, aprons are the smock of the of the cooking world. Okay,
I needed to hear you say it so that I knew and our audience knew that I knew what an apron was.
Yeah. So we'll put on our chef smocks and then we'll get our palates cleansed, right? Everyone's got a little ginger next to them to get a little refresher, or you can drink water out of a Gatorade bottle. That works too.
Oh, I was just thirsty, but
okay, cool. Yeah.
That wasn't a bit. That was just me being me.
Well, and we'll taste the charcuterie board that is Thrasios and Tymna.
Yeah. What flavor would you dear boy? What pray tell Thrasios Tymna selection would you like to begin our excursion with today?
Well, I guess let's start with like a why even go to this taste testing that we are establishing here in this canonical universe of the Mind Sculptors.
I actually, let's not do charcuterie. I actually think it's a wine tasting.
Oh yeah,
because just like wine, unless you know what you're looking at, it all looks and tastes the same.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. The $10 Thrasios and Tymna still gets the job done, you know what I mean? But it's not the same thing, right? Listen, like Madanan is a $50 Thrasios and Tymna deck.
Yeah,
they play for casual streams, right? It still gets the job done, right?
Yeah.
But like that's a wine you can get drunk off of, but not maybe a wine where you're feeling those elegant flavors. You know,
you're not drinking that because you want to have an experience.
Yeah,
you're drinking that because you want to have an experience.
Yeah, you want to forget a lot of experiences.
But yes, you were saying
so why go down this wine tasting in the first place, right? So Thrasios and Tymna, I think, is really clearly showing itself as one of the new dominant archetypes in the metagame, as it was many a year ago, like
most of cEDH's history.
Honestly. To be honest, a significant portion of this format has been well represented by Thrasios Tymna. Now, I don't think we're back at the point where we're like, there was a point where people considered it as much of a problem as people considered Blue Farm, like back, about 6 months ago, right? So I definitely don't think we're at that point. And one of the things, you might have heard me already mention on this podcast is Thrasios Tymna is a little bit more diverse than Blue Farm, right? Like Blue Farm's diversity was like 6 cards most of the time, right? Where Thrasios Tymna, like, you can actually build once again, with a lot of these different flavors in mind, right? So,
well, I think, if we're going to go with the like alcohol reference, right? I think Blue Farm is a lot like a vodka where it's like
I was thinking vodka too.
There's not a lot of ways that you can make vodka to like.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it's still vodka.
It's
like,
it's vodka, and sometimes you put juice on it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's it.
like, and the reason I say that is because, and we've talked about this a little bit on the show in like a previous episodes, where it's like, the win cons in Blue Farm, specifically Breach, really kind of build the deck for you.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if you're going to be playing Breach and Necropotence, then you want to be on X number of cards. And so it kind of determines a lot of the deck for you. And so you just have a lot less space to like, you know, play jazz with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so Thrasios Tymna, on the other hand, the like best win con in the colors is just plainly Thoracle Console. Like just plainly. And
I don't know, radical. That seems pretty crazy.
I know. But because of that, you get to get really creative with how you put that win together in these colors, because you are not constrained to, all right, so I got to have this package for Breach and that layers with this Necropotence package and this thing. It all, you have a lot more room to experiment with stuff, because it's not as straightforward. And I think in part that might just be like kind of the nature of like green in general is just like a lot more room to explore, if that makes sense. Like green doesn't feel like it's as, because there's more good green stuff than there is, you know, like solidly good red stuff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
Your options are a lot more broad in green than they are in red.
I can get behind that sort of mentality for it. Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of my take on why they're a little bit different, but in that regard. But
yeah, and you know, I do think green adds that definitely level of flexibility. I mean, you can even see the differences between the decks that play even like survival of the fittest, right? Like there are Razaketh style decks that are playing survival, or there are decks that are showing off the new Hazel Brewmaster line, right? Probably the most efficient thing to ever happen to a survival of the fittest, right? So like there's a lot of really cool stuff sort of around, and yeah, let's start putting our fancy wine smocks on and starting to take. I think I'm under the impression you wear a smock for 90% of activities. Is that correct?
You know, that's really all basketball jerseys really are.
Yeah,
really
they're sports smocks, you know?
They're just sports smocks. I mean, what is a shirt but a really elaborate smock, right? Like
it's a day smock. Yeah,
it's a day smock. Yeah. So, but let's kind of look at the first list here, and this might be the list that I think the most people might be seeing floating around right now, and that is Jordan Drake's list that he won the Boyle with over this past weekend. And this is, I feel like if I were to like, if people were to, who are not familiar with this deck but are familiar with like decks that you've played, I would say this is like Dawnwaker Thrasios, but with Tymna as the partner. Like that's what the deck is effectively.
Yeah, I mean that's we're seeing a lot of these like Thrasios Tymna mid-range grind engines, right? Like that is really just it, right? Like it's a lot of this you know, the idea, and honestly, I think if you look at third place Andy Beach's version of this list, it looks even more like a Dawnwaker list, like to a almost comical degree, right? Playing like Emil and Derevi lines and podding into stuff like that, right? So like definitely very much that type of vibe, right?
Andy, if you're listening, I need you to know that I was really in love with your Thrasios Tymna list from the weekend. I really liked this list.
Yeah. Yeah, and let's talk about I guess what we can find in Jordan's list, right? So what you'll often see here, and we're seeing this a lot, is like the core of a lot of these decks, right? And the core of a lot of these Thrasios Tymna lists are basically, so you have your Oracle Console, right? You know, which is your least investment heavy combo, but maybe not your best combo in the deck, pretty arguably, right? you have what's probably the most efficiently assembled combo, which is having a devoted druid in the graveyard and then playing a Hazel Brewmaster.
Yep.
Hazel Brewmaster ETBs, exiles your devoted druid. You then make a food that has the abilities devoted druid, which will then be able to tap and untap itself infinitely, making infinite green mana.
Mm-hmm.
In a lot of these decks, they're also playing Swift Reconfiguration for Devoted Druid. Same sort of idea there. You're just turning Devoted Druid into a vehicle, and then while it's a vehicle, it can't die to having infinite 1/1 counters. So once again, infinite green mana. A lot of them are on the Kin and Basalt line, right? So, a decent amount of layered infinite mana lines, right?
Right.
On top of the normal generic value stuff, right? Like the Seedborn Muses, the Esper Sentinels, the Ristics, Mystics. A lot of them are also on the Flood Caller lines, I've noticed, being on Valley Flood Caller plus Retraction Helix, which allows you to sort of pick up and then put down mana rocks in a repeated manner, and then as you're playing them, they
There's
untap
no
the
way
Flood
that's
Caller.
the best combo that you can do with Flood Caller.
Listen,
I just refuse to believe that.
Listen, Cal, I hate to tell you, this is a combo people are playing a lot of. I am also a hater for this specific combo, specifically because, a 1-mana blue instant is literally the most counterable card type in the format.
Yeah.
So for me, I am one of the skeptics for sure, but,
hey, if that's what gets your engine going, I guess, you do you, fan, but
Cal's trying the new thing where they're trying to be hip with the youth. Is it working?
yeah. Am I one of the youths? I'm only 30. I'm not that old. Almost 31, but yeah, I think the thing that stands out to me about this list is, you might have, I think a lot of people in the cEDH community are like familiar with like the no bad cards archetypes and stuff like this, and this very much feels like it's in line with that philosophy of
Sure.
our card quality. We're like card quality over like full deck, like like synergy, if that makes sense. And I think part of why it works really well in Thrasios Tymna is because both of your commanders take advantage of high card quality cards better than most commanders. Like you have 2 advantage engines in the command zone. And so when your card quality is much higher than your opponents are on average, when you're able to gain advantage straight out of the command zone, the deck kind of figures itself out, I feel like. Whereas when you have a deck like Najeela, you have to, and I've said this before, this is kind of like the issue between like a deck like Tivit Najeela and a deck like Tymna Crom, right? Where when you have the win cons in the command zones, you have to kind of like overcompensate with draw engines and advantage engines in the 99 so that you can get the stuff that you need to like assemble your win. And these types of decks feel like they're the opposite way, which is why they get to just play like tons of good cards.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Where you have, I mean, you sort of have this cheat button in the command zone, right? Which is just like, hey, this card is generically good, kind of with no matter what you're kind of doing, right? Like Thrasios and Tymna is going to look attractive, kind of no matter what, right? So that's sort of this kind of freebie you have going on here, right? For those purposes.
Yeah. I think the other version that people might be familiar with is D-Train's Razaketh's list. Razaketh has been around since like the dawn of time, it feels like. But Razaketh's, God, I could do a whole video just on the history of Razaketh's, because people might look at this list and go, hey, Cal, why is this called Razaketh's exactly?
Yeah, true.
And that is very fair
nowadays. Yeah.
There's the old combo would be that with Razaketh out, you would assemble like a Leonin Relic Warder with a Animate Dead or a Necromancy or something like that, and you would just like create a loop where that would come in and out because it would flicker or it would exile its own piece, but then it would die and then get brought back, and you would have something out like a Blood Artist or something like that, and it would just kill the table. And that's where the name comes from. Razaketh's now is basically a Razaketh. It really doesn't need the cat's parts.
Sure.
But with this, what is kind of the different angle with this, Ian? Because it's effectively doing the same thing as the last deck we were just talking about, right? The last iteration of it. It's very much using the Hazel's Brewmaster stuff to assemble that. But what is it doing differently that kind of sets it apart from that?
So in one deck, you sort of top out at 5 mana with this fun little fella known as Seedborn Muse.
Mm-hmm.
The other deck, you also get to play Seedborn Muse, but you care about the graveyard. It's really the big difference between the archetypes there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the one of the sort of thought patterns with the Razaketh variant is like, as things get grindier and stuff like that, right? There comes a point where basically I can just hard cast a Razaketh because of the advantage that I am generating with this deck. If you get to a critical nexus in the late game, even if it's not reanimating it, right, getting it onto the battlefield, because Razaketh is the payoff, right? Like, it's not like there's like 60,000 reanimator targets in these lists. It is often just Razaketh, right?
Mm-hmm.
So usually with a card like Life Death, you're able to like turn your lands into creatures and then just convert like a Razaketh on the field into a win rather expediently. What you lose is maybe a bit of card quality, right? You know, you have a lot of this deck worried about sort of this side plan, right? The plan B almost, right? But what you gain is a little bit more of that that over the top punch that some Tymna Thrasios lists are sort of lacking, you know.
It gives it really does give you that like ability to just like get over the top of the hill a lot of times.
Correct.
I think one of the things that people might like the life death lines, I think, are what makes this the most appealing, because for people who are unfamiliar, the first thing that you do when you get a Razaketh out is you sack a creature, get life. Not all the time, but like generally you would do that. Depending on how many tutors you would need to assemble your win.
Right.
Cast life, make all your lands creatures, and then you can just sacrifice lands and get tutors, which is a huge advantage in this. And so that is one of the advantages of playing that card. It also, death side of it is also a reanimate, so it isn't just a dead card, right? You know, it has other utility outside of that one. And I think that's what really makes it a good playable card. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
The other, the next version is probably like the most famous version of it, in my opinion, and that is Breakfast Hawk. This was like the boogeyman of the format for a long time.
Yes.
And that was when Flash was around.
Yeah.
This is also kind of a reanimator deck. So what is this one doing differently? Because this one's not on the Brewmaster stuff. This is on a whole other combo.
No, I gotta ask, have you seen a Breakfast Hulk version of this deck right now? Because I really haven't in the current meta game.
I don't know that I have seen one out there, but like I think it's something that's worth being aware of.
Yeah, and I would assume that saying that they aren't on devoted lines might be inaccurate, right? Like I could easily see, and especially because technically speaking, the Hazel Brewmaster devoted Druid package is just a Hulk line, right? Because you go get Hazel with the ETB. Oh no, because I guess that wouldn't quite work because the ETB needs a target, and you can't kill it. The devoted Druid in response to the ETB from Hazel. Okay, so I guess that doesn't work, but it's also a deck where you're probably already playing survival because of Protean Hulk stuff, anyways. So like, probably
it's just like how many slots do you want to dedicate to it? I think is the ultimate question. Because this is one of the things that I think with Breakfast Hulk. One of the things. So the reason it's called Breakfast Hulk is with Hulk, you are assembling. We've talked about this on the show multiple times. We've did a Nadu deck based around this. Is the breakfast combo, a Cephalid Illusionist and Nomads and Core. The big reason to do this, as where with like Razaketh, right? As a reanimator target, you have, you know, a pretty big way to win, you still have to cast a bunch of spells.
Yeah.
And so it makes it a little bit harder to just go off on top of people.
Yeah.
Whereas with this particular version of like a
Mhm.
reanimator style deck,
Yeah.
somebody could be doing a thing, and if you have a way, like, if you can just reanimate your Hulk, like, this plays necromancy, for instance.
Yeah.
uh if you can reanimate your Hulk at instant speed, you could just win on top of people.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
that is one of the advantages of this deck, is you are able
Wait, no,
to,
that's actually not true, right?
I mean, if you have a sack outlet out, you can.
Oh, sure.
And like
Yeah.
generally you want to have a sack outlet at all.
Yeah.
I've played this is a deck that I have played an absurd amount, even
Sure.
post flash ban. This is very similar to like the Rector fit deck that I played for a long time. It's very reminiscent of it.
Yeah.
The big difference here is I used Arena Rector as like a body snatcher almost, where instead of playing body snatcher, I played Liliana,
Yeah.
Death's Majesty, and then you
Yeah.
had like a Jace backup line, which I felt was
Mhm.
a little bit better than like Labman lines. But there's
Agreed.
pros and cons to doing
Yeah.
that no matter what. But the big advantage being overall is that you don't have to cast a lot of spells to win
Mhm.
with this, and I think that is the big advantage of Breakfast Talk.
Right. Yeah, Breakfast Hulk definitely is one of those, like, the more rule laws are in the format, the better
The
that
better
deck
this
does,
is,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was like the time when you saw it, even post Flash Plan, doing pretty well was when we were going through that rule of law phase for the format, right?
Right.
And so yeah, the idea being, right, we're just trying to get a Hulk onto the field. We have a lot of redundancy, and Ranger Captain of EOS was like a huge piece for this archetype, because now you have this thing that's the silence effect that also fetches your carrion
Sack
feeder or
outlet.
your Viscera Seer,
Yeah.
exactly, right, to be your sack outlet. So that was a pretty, big upgrade for the Hulk strategies in general, right? But in general, the biggest weakness of this archetype is that it's so slot intensive, right? Like
Yes.
you really lose 20 to 30 cards in the deck building process just to work through your win cons and the redundancy of getting to them and all of that sort of malarkey, right? So it's a big sort of downside to the deck, and the upside being obviously like a resilient win condition that is hard to interact with once certain pieces hit the stack, right?
And I think that because people might hear how many slots you have to give up and think, oh, well, then the deck must not be very good. But when your deck is built around, my deck wants to do this thing, when you are like dedicating your deck entirely to that, it streamlines itself very well.
Yeah, exactly.
Moving down, some of the other lists that I have seen, these are a couple of these lists are like ones that I've seen on like the deck list database, but like, there are other versions out there. The big consensus you're probably going to see right now with TnT is the Brewmaster build. That is likely to be the deck you're going to see the most of. But the reason we're doing this episode is to familiarize you with all the various ways that this deck can get played, because somebody might walk out and have what is on our next one, which is Consult Abdel Thrasios. So this is a play on what used to be a big deck in Commander, which was CST, which was Consult Scepter Thrasios, which assembled the Isochron Scepter and Dramatic Reversal combo. This, on the other hand, is doing stuff with Abdel Adrian. How does this exactly work, Ian?
Sure. So yeah, Abdel is basically if you're ever messing around with World Gold Dragons, it's much the same, right? If you have a Necromancy, Animate Dead, or Necromancy, Dance of the Dead, or Animate Dead, reanimating your Abdel Adrian, what you can do is use Abdel's ATB to exile one of the enchantments in question, along with X amount of other things, right? So at minimum, if you just have the two of them, you're going to make infinite 1/1s, because as you exile the enchantment, it will say, well, hey, I was the thing keeping Abdel around, sacrifice your Abdel. It'll go back to the graveyard. Then the enchantment will come back, it'll bring Abdel back, et cetera, et cetera. Each time you're doing that, you're making a 1/1 with Abdel, right? Now, if you keep in consideration any amount of things with enter the battlefield abilities and or mana rocks, right? All of those things are allowing you to generate extra value on top of it, right? Even if you have a soul ring, that's infinite colorless mana as you execute this loop, right? If you have a creature with an ETB, right? Like say a Spellseeker or a Ranger Captain of EOS, you're getting infinite copies of those things, right? Any sort of, and obviously like it's a Thrasios deck, right? So you're able to then use the infinite mana in most scenarios to then pay into Thrasios and win the game, right? So a combo with a lot of extra benefits to it for sure. And while the analog to World Gorger exists, if you get blown out on Abdel, you
aren't out of the game entirely.
Yeah,
you can still play the game.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, what are some of the downsides of this build particularly?
I mean, it's another thing where you're like, yeah, you got to put a bunch of effort and stock into the graveyard, right? Like that's the real big thing. Like I at the end of the day, I don't think it's like, oh my god, there's all these bad parts of this deck. It's a solid deck. I'm not too pressed about it either way, right? Like I think it does what it needs to do very fine. I'm not like super jazzed about it. I think it's probably underexplored in the current metagame right now, if I'm being honest. The biggest downside I think is like in Sans Red, you're only encouraged to play a few mana rocks anyways, right? Not like none, but not an like insane amount as it might be, right? So you do have to like have that as a bit of a deck building concession. The other potential downside is like, I mean, one thing you could also just layer this with Razaketh too, right? If that's a game plan that you're going for anyways, it could just be a different outlet for your deck. Razaketh is a little more slot intensive, so there's a little bit of give and take when it comes to that dynamic that I'm kind of exploring right now. The other thing is like it's once again another very graveyard dependent style of strategy, right? So anytime you're working with like reanimator style stuff, you need to entomb a piece, then you need the thing to bring it back, then you need, as I mentioned, some of these extra things in the battlefield, which can be super incidental, but you still need them to be there, right? And so it's a lot of working, moving pieces. Nothing, I would describe as egregious by any means, right? But like it's definitely an amount of pieces that you need to invest into for sure.
Yeah, 100%. It is one of those things, and I really appreciate that it exists. Mostly because of the fact that I feel like this is more of a white ability than it is a red ability. But World Gorger also feels like the most red way you could do this ability, if that makes sense. But yeah, that is what this deck is. Also, like you can still build this as a Scepter deck as well. It is effectively the same build. The difference being is that your mana dorks in the Scepter version work, as where with this you can't reset your mana dorks when you flicker Abdel, and that's kind of the trade-off you're making, but that's like a concession you're okay making.
I think it's also worth noting too that like shoot, sorry, totally blank there. What was the last thing you just said?
The concession.
Ice Crown Scepter. I think it's also worth considering too that like just Isochron Scepter and Dramatic Reversal are just considerably worse, right? Like it just card quality wise, like you have to resolve a single enchantment to make this loop work, whereas like Consult Scepter is like
you have to assemble multiple pieces.
You have to assemble multiple pieces. If anything ever happens to Isochron Scepter, it goes away. If Isochron Scepter gets blown up while this combo is assembled, your Dramatic Reversal is exiled forever. You need a lot more mana from rocks to actually make it work. You also need, to cast an instant infinite amount of times into Aristic, Study, Mystic, Remora, Esper Sentinel meta, right? Like there's so many more ways that Isochron Scepter falls on its face. I think.
Absolutely. The other version here is a version that I feel like we haven't seen a lot of this archetype in a while, but it's still out there somewhere. And that is Hermit Druid. Thrasios Tymna. Hermit Druid is, in my opinion, actually probably a little bit like not that bad right now. Especially because we've slowed down Bowmasters a little bit. I like it a little bit more. But all that being said, like you have Hermit Druid decks. And so for people who are unfamiliar with how Hermit Druid works, how does this particular build function?
Yeah, so Hermit Druid is really an archetype that is somewhat historical at this point. And it was definitely associated with speed back in the day before, ad nauseum became actually good. And so the idea is that a Hermit Druid is an archetype in which you play the card Hermit Druid. You can also layer it with the breakfast combo, like we mentioned beforehand, right? And basically, these are creature combos that allow you to mill your entire library, right? With Hermit Druid, it says reveal cards until you reveal a basic, and then put everything revealed this way into your graveyard. Now the trick is here's where clever listeners will hear you just don't play basics. Yeah. And then you mill your entire library, and it's very easy. Remember when it used to be hard to build Hermit Druid mana base?
Yeah, that is there was a period of time
Yeah.
where if you were not in 4 or 5 colors, it was like impossible.
It was really hard. Like I played a couple 2-color Hermit Druid decks, and we were like, what do we even play at this point? Like it's like you had to play like the Mirrodin lands and shit.
Yeah,
like, it was crazy.
It was truly wild for a while, and now like you're just kind of like, oh, I guess I'll just play this MDFC. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Anywho, yeah. So with Hermit Druid, you mill your entire library, and then usually flash back a Dread Return, which is a sorcery that allows you to sack 3 creatures to return a creature in your graveyard to the battlefield. So you would sack a Hermit Druid and probably an Archamoeba, which is a creature that comes in when you mill it, and then usually one other card, sometimes like a Fate Stitcher, or just one of your Mana Dorks or your Commander or whatever it might be, right? Yeah. Depending on how fast you're trying to go with the archetype. And then you would just put a Thoracle onto the battlefield, and you're like, hey, I don't have a library anymore. I win.
Yeah. Some of them can. I know that like Combat Courier is one that they've started playing instead of what's the other one? The zombie one.
Fate Stitcher.
Fate Stitcher, because of the fact that this also can draw a card, so it also works with Lab Man as well.
I will also say Hermit Druid, historically was a Thras Tymna archetype, but I think if there is a modern interpretation
it's
of
a Kenrith deck, in my opinion.
It's a Kenrith deck.
100%.
Exactly. Kenrith has the ability to inherently reanimate Thoracle on a body. It also has the ability to give Hermit Druid haste on the turn you would like to win. Like, it's just
the other thing that is really cool with Hermit Druid in Kenrith, and I know this episode isn't about Kenrith, but one of the things I love about Kenrith Hermit Druid is you get really nice Underworld Breach layering with it.
You do.
Because you get multiple ways to turn your Breach on, which is very, very nice.
Yeah, and you don't have to play like Labman as your backup win. Instead, you can just
play Breach
away to just put Breach into the battlefield, and then win from, because your whole library is in your graveyard.
But one of the things that I've always really liked about Hermit Druid, and I guess we're kind of talking about Kenrith now, but whatever, is that like breakfast, it just layers all of the combos you would use to get stuff into your graveyard. All layer really well. Brain freeze lines layer really well because they all kind of overlap each other in a really meaningful way. And so that's one of the things that I've always really liked about Hermit Druid decks, especially like the 5-color ones that get to play Breach, is you get that layering that you just don't get in like a lot of other decks. And that's something I've always really liked about it.
Yeah, super fair.
Maybe it's time for us to bring back a Kenrith Hermit Druid deck.
Maybe.
Yeah. And then the last one here that I'm looking at is a Chain Stasis build of it. Which is an interesting one. Because it's a little bit like the stuff that you do with Flood Caller and what's it called? The one mana
Retraction Helix.
It's very similar to that, because you have Chain Stasis.
All
which
aboard
is
the train station.
the way Chain Stasis works is it's a 1-mana instant that says you may tap or untap target creature. Then that creature's controller may pay 2 colorless and a blue. If the player does, they may copy the spell and may choose new targets for that copy. So what you do with that in like a, I don't know, a Bloom Tender, you make infinite mana. And so as kind of an extension of that, cards like Freed from the Real end up getting played in this list because it's a little bit more bent on. It does have the Devoted Druid and the Brewmaster lines, but this particular build also layers in Bloom Tender, and so you're able to kind of pivot between the two of them, which I do think is an advantage of this. You know, what are your thoughts on this particular build overall?
Yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's not, I don't even want to call it like an independent build, right? It is more just like a single card combo, right? Like, in my opinion, which is like, sure, it works, is very sneaky when it works. I don't really have a whole lot to say about Chain Stasis. I'm not like
super fair.
I'm not a devotee to the archetype. I think it is remarkably average. I don't really love the idea because, like, the more popular this becomes, the more popular just auto killing any Bloom Tender you see becomes, which is different. Right now, it's free to incidentally kill Bloom Tenders. But when it comes to the point where you're like, well, they could just Bloom Tender murder me out of nowhere, I've got to aggro kill it every time.
Well,
that is a.
Could play Fabro Elder.
Okay, and the paradigm then shifts to I auto kill Fabro Elder every time. Like, I don't know what you mean. Like, when that is the paradigm that we have to operate with, it makes me not super exuberant. And that's also you sort of incidentally brought up another sort of qualm I have with the archetype, which is you have Bloom Tender and Fabro Elder, and that's the only pieces in the deck that combo with that.
Right, and I think that it is a super valid way of looking at it, and I think the two different infinite mana lines don't layer over top of each other, and I think that's the big not selling point of it. But with that, you do get a little bit more consistency in the assemblage of a infinite mana combo potentially.
Sure, for sure.
Is kind of the trade-off you get there. But
yeah, absolutely. And you know, one thing I want to shout out at this point too is also there's an archetype of TnT I don't know that we have discussed. And this one came up when we saw it in by a lovely pilot named Alex, who's from California, whose username is escaping me at the current moment. But Alex played what's effectively like Null Rod TnT, right? Which I do think is a very powerful archetype, right? And actually did perform pretty well, even in the last meta where TnT was not favored as much as it is currently, right? And this Null Rod TnT list is, and I call it that because it is on Null Rod, Oath, Stony Silence, right? The idea being like, if these other archetypes are going to abuse speed as much as possible, what happens when one of the best mid-range decks in the format, being TnT, also breaks parity on these very powerful Stax pieces while still operating on a high value basis that it can operate on. Now, I'd argue that version is very susceptible to board control, right? So like a deck like Tivit, I feel like would be a pretty exceptionally poor matchup for it. However, it's very good against some of the faster decks that exist in the format, you know, and also has leveraging advantage against decks like Kinnan and archetypes like that as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And it's interesting because I think that those types of decks have a lot more. I think that they are better positioned now than they might have ever been. And so I'm interested to see exactly how that all shakes out.
Agreed.
But yeah, overall, what are your thoughts on Thrasios Tymna, like as a archetype right now, or as a commander pairing in like this current metagame?
I mean, it's hard to argue with the results, right? It's put up a lot of good numbers post ban, right? I think Thrasios Tymna is very much back. I think it's arguably, in my opinion, I think it's moved to the #1 deck right now. as far as consistency and stuff like that is concerned. And, you know, the number one deck, as far as most players can pick up Thrasios and Tymna and perform at an exceptional level, right? There's a number of other decks in the format that are arguably as strong or stronger that have super intense ceiling floor dynamics, right? Rog Saikin and Sisay are some of the ones that come to mind immediately because of that, right? And so I think it's a really interesting deck to have around. I think obviously if you're looking for a, like, there are people out there in our audience who want to find a deck that they're going to feel secure with and know that if they invest money into that deck, they can play that deck for the next 2 years. And I feel like if you have to pick a deck for that right now, this would be the deck I would lock in.
Yeah, I would very much agree with that.
It's going to be a generically good deck for the next years. And even if the meta shakes up, even if Doxag gets unbanned, any of this stuff, like the core of this deck will still be a good, powerful archetype that you can play with, right? So all that being said, you know, I think the Tymna Thrasios core is very, very strong right now. I think, once again, the Hazel lines are really a huge upgrade for the deck that we got out of Bloom Burrow. So definitely, you know, sort of even with the ban combined with the Hazel lines, just gave the archetype really just an injection to be able to compete at the highest levels, right? And it's going to be strong. I think there's still a lot to explore with it. Once again, I'm okay with it being the boogeyman because it can be a boogeyman and exist in all of the archetypes we mentioned today, you know? Even in the mid-range decks, you're seeing so many, like, once again, like the comparing like Jorman's 30 cards from Max P's Festival of Nights, right? Like just wild differentiations between even the successful versions of this deck that exist right now, right?
Yeah. So. Well, I mean, you've got like even just the difference between like Razakeths, right? In like the brewmaster builds of it. Just like stuff like that, I think is just really interesting because it's like these decks can have a lot of the same cards, but it's those like 10 to 15 card differences that really make the difference with them, and you feel the play pattern differences in this so much more than you do in a lot of other decks. I feel like it's all those one deck we got to make sure we shout out is Sacred Guide, Thrasios.
Oh yeah, I forgot. We almost got through the episode without shouting out the worst Thrasios and Tymna archetype in the world.
It's basically Hermit Druid, but you have Sacred Guide, and by extension that means you don't get to play any white cards. So
yes. To clarify that amazingly roundabout metaphor, Sacred Guide literally says you exile cards until you hit a white card in your deck. So Tymna in the command zone and Sacred Guide are the only white permanents in everything, or white cards in your entire 99, right?
So you don't get Grand Abolisher, you don't get Silence, you don't get Ranger Captain.
Yeah, let's try that again. You don't get Grand Abolisher, you don't get Ranger Captain, you don't get Silence, you don't get Enlightened Tutor.
Smothering Tide.
You don't get Smothering Tide. You don't get Esper Sentinel. And I just want to, like, just in case we missed the point of like why, just things that you might like, some flex cards you might have to omit if you play Sacred Guide. You don't get Grand Abolisher. You don't get Ranger Captain. You don't get Silence. You don't get Esper Sentinel or Smothering Tide. But yeah, it's a good archetype. Keep playing it, guys. Like the best cards available to you. Just like, but what, hear me out. What if we didn't for one little
what
shitty...
if I didn't play Draneth?
You don't get it. It's a demonic consultation on a stick. Why wouldn't you want it?
But listen, I can tutor it with Ranger Captain.
But if I play Yisan in the 99, then you can first verse grabs you Sacred Guide, and then you untap Yisan and you grab Thoracle. Cal, are you listening? I don't think you get it. You know what the worst part is? My brain was like, oh, but maybe you could grab it off Ranger Captain. No, you can't.
You can't play Ranger Captain in the deck, guys. This is an argument that you and Sick Robot have had so many times. It's hilarious.
It's at least half a decade long at this point. And they keep printing better white cards to prove my point. But also, Ranger Captain and Grand Abolisher and Silence, those were around for the entire time we had this argument.
They've been here the whole time.
Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, Ian, if people want to get some coaching on how to build a better Sacred Guide deck, where can they? How can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, if you need someone to tell you on a professional basis not to play Sacred Guide, you can find me at comedianmtg@gmail.com. It's the easiest place to schedule something with me. There's also a number of other socials that Cal is lovely enough to link, as well as my own YouTube channel, Comedian MTG, where you can find tournament breakdowns, deck techs, all that kind of cEDH goodness. Yeah, good stuff. Yeah.
Goodness gracious.
Uh-huh.
Oh my goodness. If you want to support the podcast, you can head over to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors and give us a little money. That would be lovely.
Help.
I need to pay rent. But also if you want to help the podcast in a non-financial way, you can go to the right here on YouTube. You can go down below, hit the like and subscribe button. If you're watching it on a TV, you want to press up in the app to get the like and subscribe. They move it around a little bit, but if you push up twice, you'll get there if you're watching on TV. And then on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. So that helps us in those algorithms as well. We really need to give more love to the Spotify folks. I think you've thoroughly scared the Spotify audience away, and I think that's,
I've scared them away.
Well, you've talked a lot of shit about.
I talked a lot of shit. Yeah, I think they know what's up. I think they hang.
They know my thoughts.
So what you're saying is I've put the Spotify audience in their fucking place.
I love you, Spotify audience. You're the real ones.
You are tangible.
This has been Mind Sculptors. I'm Cal.
I'm Ian. Bye.
Stay sculpty, everybody.